All right. Hello, everybody. This is the Conformance Subproject for the Kubernetes SIG architecture on October 22nd, 2019. And let's pull up the agenda. All right, I guess we start with AI. So it looks like my name's there. So on the tooling cap, we do have the first phase essentially in the cap. It was merged. Jeffrey has submitted a PR for that, as well as sent me a run of the tool against PodsBack to get a list of behaviors. What I need to do is I'm going to go through and curate that list and then put out a PR for that. So the tooling as it works today is more or less an assistance for a human. It's not really an automation, but nonetheless, I think it's useful. There's a PR for the tooling. Anyway, I need to review that and take the list that he gave me, do some curation. I'll submit it as a first list for people to take a look at and see what they think around how we might produce these kind of behaviors. That's the status there. Tim, it looks like you are on and you've got an AI there.
Oh, I need to follow up on this. I will actually start that right now. So.
Okay. We do have, around this broadening pool of approvers, we do have a session. It's not on the schedule yet, but I'll be giving up half of another session and giving it to Conformance. So we'll have a session, probably 25 minutes or maybe a little less, to talk about Conformance at the summit, Contributor Summit, and to try to recruit people for the effort. And Hippie will be leading that. Next AI, is that Devin? Am I got the name right?
It is. I don't see Devin on the call yet, but I'll take that. He's with II. We had an action item to contribute to the contributor guide for writing conformance tests, and that got merged.
Okay.
I'm sure when was that? An hour ago. Awesome. Thanks, Tim.
I always try to run through the PRs before the meeting. So.
Yeah, I hope to do the same, but I was caught in meetings all day today, and so I didn't get to some of the others. But
as we still have other PRs that we're looking at, but I'll go ahead and go to my next item, the PROW Conformance Bot Cap. Thanks, Tim, for looking at that. It might be good to have a discussion on that as well, just to make sure I'm capturing it. And part of that is what I put on the agenda for today about conformance numerators and denominators, so we can get that into the KEP, so that when we deny people merging, they know precisely why they're getting denied, and it's agreed upon. But those would be my two suggested things for today, is go a little bit over the conformance bot KEP and the numerators and denominators for what will drive the bot.
okay, well, I mean, I don't have anything else. I don't know if anybody else in the call beyond what you put here on the agenda, Hippie. My main thing was, like I said, I need to do some work around reviewing PRs, and anybody else, obviously, those are PRs that can be reviewed, and keep moving the things forward. We do need to have a discussion on what we want in that session specifically, and Hippie and I were talking about this on Slack earlier, and we can, since we have, looks like we'll probably have time in the agenda today, we can cover that here. So from my point of view, I guess since somebody put it in the agenda, is that you, Hippie, putting in the agenda? Since you put it in before your other item, let's go ahead and do it. So as far as I'm concerned, I think we need a couple of minutes of what is conformance? Why is it important? Most people know that, but not everybody. And that should be just short, brief, like one slide type of thing. I don't know if Dan's going to be at the contributor summit, but I'd be happy to do that, or anybody else. This is for contributor summit, not for main conference. Main conference, we also have a spot, and that's more of a working meeting, as I recall. Then Tim, do you I guess we need to talk about what help we need, right? So we need help reviewing. We need to tell people that the policy is now that when you're going to GA, you need conformance tests. That means you need to have end-to-end tests that are already running, that aren't flaky, that meet the conformance criteria, so that we can promote them or roughly.
So I'm actually writing that in the email now. So the email is both a like, what are we doing and why it matters to you. So literally what the email says is like, what is conformance, why you should care, how you can help. When are the enforcement bots coming?
Okay, so maybe what we can look at what you put out in your email, and we can take that, unless you want help forming that right now. The how you can help is the other thing. Well, I guess need help reviewing. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about the new, if we can, assuming it's in decent enough shape, the way we're doing behaviors, and sort of a solicitation from the SIGs to define their behaviors, or at least a notice that, hey, we're going to be coming and talking to you and wanting you to list out what you think are conforming behaviors for your SIG.
Okay.
So that if we can keep this a little briefer, that would be good. The sharing time with this other SIG architecture session for, quote, the vision, which is going to be basically we don't think we need 2.0 anytime soon. And then talking about, this is, you don't need to put this in the, it's sharing time with that. So if we can give that a little more than 25 minutes is my main point.
To decide if we if this is going to be that short of just saying here's the policy bot as it is right now, and that being the encouragement, and talking about what it's going to be requiring.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
You said the bots are coming. This is kind of like, here are the bots. Here are the PR terminators.
That quote is coming in the email.
Yeah, so here's what they are right now. Here's what we expect them to be next cycle, say. All right, next item here, the main conference. I haven't given this any thought yet. So I guess if I'm going to give it thought on the moment, on the spot, like one of the things I'd really like to do this cycle, and we could take advantage of this face-to-face time to hopefully make progress, is to actually come to agreement on optional features and how to test them. So I don't know if that's feasible, given the other work we have to do prior to whether we can do the groundwork for the face-to-face time in time. But if we can, that's something I think it's been years, literally, basically since almost the conception of the project, as I understand. So if we can nail down optional features, agree how we're going to do it, that would be freaking amazing. To watch my language for the recording posterity. Anybody else have things they think we would like to achieve at that particular working group meeting?
How far into the, I almost want to have a place where at least once a day or a few times where we have active pairing on test, or like I almost want to go to each one of the SIGs and find that representative from that SIG and just spend some time connecting with them.
So
kind of go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that's an awesome idea. There's actually at the summit, there's a dedicated SIG meet and greet. So at the SIG meet and greet, there will be representatives from every single SIG. I think every single SIG has signed up to have somebody there, and so we should make an effort to take that and meet each of them. Take 5-10 minutes face to face with each SIG to have some, more human contact there, which I think will be a lot more effective than just hounding people over email. That's an awesome idea. But that's not necessarily part of the working meeting, but that's part of the summit. I think that comes right before the awards, if I recall correctly.
Awesome.
All right. So any other goals for that working meeting? I think that's a pretty good goal, honestly. If we can achieve that, that would be more than enough. But other thoughts?
We have a document from an earlier meeting, I think, where we put together the notes of what might be on it before we requested the time. I'll scroll down, see if I can't find that.
All right. Well, let's see how it's advertised. I mean, when I had hoped the one in Barcelona would be more of a working meeting, but when I arrived, I saw the arrangement of the room, and it was a little more of a presentation style. And we might want to double check or look at what's on schedule and make sure that we're selling it the right way. Because if it's sold as a presentation, we're gonna have a bunch of people there that don't necessarily have any interest in doing what we're talking about doing. We can always try to arrange some sort of,
I would love to have a room or a booth or something where we have big screens, and it's intentionally set up for people to, schedule an hour with someone else. And then we find a way where we can record the output of those sessions. So almost like Twitch for pairing on writing Kubernetes code. We don't really have this, especially for people who aren't, in a big company where there's people near them all the time to do this pairing. But getting that culture of how do you code on Kubernetes? How do you write tests? How do you, and having that be a conversational thing over, that's what we do all the time in II, but I haven't had a lot of space to do that. And I think I'm interested in seeing how we can fit that in. We talk about a working session.
I think it's pretty hard at this point to try and do that because the AD resources have all been requisitioned and all that stuff. Like,
sure.
We're probably not, like for San Diego, it's probably a little late to try and organize that. But the summit does that. So in the summit, there's sessions and workshops. Sessions are more just blah, 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 blah. And then the workshops are, it's, people around tables with their laptops and somebody leading them through an effort to actually build something or do some task. we could potentially look at, not at San Diego, it's too late, but we could potentially look at doing some sort of workshop sometime in the future around something like that. But what you're talking about is just how you build stuff on Kubernetes, how you develop on Kubernetes. That you know, the new contributors workshops will have that. The new contributor track of the summit will have some of that too. So I mean, I think that's kind of a separate topic than conformance specifically. If we want to do a conformance workshop at some point, like in Amsterdam, or wherever it's going to be. I don't know where it's going to be in North America next time. Then we should be thinking about that now, so that when that opens up, when the summit call for workshops opens up, we can be ready to do that. Yeah, exactly.
Maybe that's something we can talk about in the meeting as well. The actual working group meeting.
Sure. Okay, if nobody else has anything on this, let's move on to this last agenda item. Maybe we'll get out of here a little early today. And then we should go review PRs, is what we should do if we have extra time.
In general, I think the contributing to writing tests stuff that we've added is that we need to create more tickets to try to get agreement on something before we write it. And in particular, I'm trying to make sure that we have in the form of the KEP, I think is the way to get it formally done, but also as we're writing it to get feedback on these different priorities. The communicated priority, if I scroll to the top of our document here, is P1, P0 is PodsBack, and P1 is watches.
Yeah, anything with watches. Yeah.
PodsBack and watch being the next numerator and denominator. We've had operations, and I just wanted to kind of read that out so that everybody was really clear on what we've been doing, so that as we move to this next phase, we're in agreement for what those are for PodsBack and watch.
So for PodsBack, if I could just interject, so that is for the behavior cap, that is the set of behaviors that Jeffrey's generated from the API doc that I need to review and then submit a PR for. So it'll be the generated, and then we'll need to add stuff to that, right? Most likely. And the watches right now, that's going to be, we're going to need to sit down and really just spec out the details of how watch behaves in certain circumstances, which hasn't been really explicitly defined up until now. And I guess, I mean, it could be anybody. I have it on my list of something I should do, but the best person to do it would be somebody from API Machinery, Jordan or Daniel or somebody, but they're all really busy. So anyway, that's a great question, is who's going to do that. I am willing to put that as an AI for me if there's no other volunteer, and then I would have it obviously reviewed by the experts.
We've got an approach for both of these. This was kind of a way for this test for us to let you know what we found and make sure that at least this is one approach, and if we don't, then we can go down.
Okay, let's do it.
Feedback. I don't have it up in I think it actually is in a ticket off the KEP. So if I'm going to pull up the KEP on my screen, the Prow bot conformance KEP. And if I look at the, how do I view it here? There's the view button. And I think it's under definition of coverage. And so and I think Timothy had a question about this earlier, is what does it mean to be hit by a conformance test? And so one of the definitions, the first part is it's conformant when the E2E binary is the user agent, the first part of the user agent, and then it appears in an audit log. So we have to go all the way down to seeing it in an audit log right now. And we made some changes early on. I don't have the PR handy, but we modified the E2E framework so that right before it makes the call to the API server, it appends -- and then the current context for the test, which pretty much matches the name of the test as we store it in the conformance.txt.
I see.
And there are some places where I've noted that that doesn't happen. So if we want to fix that, we should probably find a really good way to make sure that that's the agreed definition of conformance. So we get a little more clear on making sure that that's happening correctly. So I guess my question here on the definition of conformance is our appending -- test, I think it's called context, fully the accurate definition. Before we go into any of the other operators, the numerator, because pretty much the numerators on all of these is conformance test hit it. But if we don't agree on this is what the definition of conformance test hit it, then we're not getting good numbers.
Yeah, I don't have an answer to that myself. I would say that that's approximately what we want. And for now, that's probably what we have. Like if you said it doesn't work sometimes, then we'd have to understand why it doesn't work sometimes.
Yeah.
But if it's working in most cases, like all of this is at this point heuristic, right? And we need to improve it over time.
Yep. I can find examples of missing context. And we can look at those later. I just want to let everybody know that it's not completely accurate. It's definitely a generalized heuristic. For operations, it's going to be the denominator of the actual path in Swagger, because we all base this off of swagger.json as it comes from the commits, that it actually has alpha or beta in the path. We've been looking more recently at operations, or sorry, at kinds and objects, and they have a specific version v1 or v1 alpha. Is
this doesn't, I mean, conformant endpoints, denominator total stable endpoints. Sure. I mean, yeah, that seems reasonable. We know that from the alpha beta perspective that if the kind itself is stable, then that's fine. It may still have alpha beta fields in it, but when we're just counting endpoints, this is reasonable.
Yeah, the endpoints themselves don't have a kind associated with them all the time, and there are a lot of endpoints that we hit since they don't have a kind associated with them. They're not. We have to look at the path, which is why we've chosen to look at the path versus look at the group version kind. Pods. Okay. I think that's probably good for just so we were clear on the operations, and that's been what API Snoop's been based on so far. And PodsBack is where we've needed to generate a full coverage map of all of our fields, and for pod to PodsBack, for example, I've and looking at every possible operation that uses PodsBack, where it goes from pod to PodsBack, there's only 687 text or integer fields, and they group together quite nicely where we can say, let's knock out this particular subfield.
Mm-hmm. Good. Okay.
And so I thought that this, in general, if we want to focus on the denominator, and so the definition of the denominator here is initially pod to anything that does PodsBack, and that's around 687 for now. And it gives us something that's attainable and reasonable. And then when we get through that, it'll likely fill out a lot of other stuff too.
Yeah, so we do have a, okay, so with the behavior, I'm not sure what this 687 is here in the scope of, eventually with the behavior stuff, the idea is that the coverage number we get is, the denominator is the behaviors, and then the numerator is the number of behaviors that are covered by some test, which is essentially tagged in the relationship between tests and behaviors. We still have, conceptually, we still have, how do we come up with that list of behaviors, right? The list of behaviors comes from a manual process of generating stuff from API spec, of reading documentation, of tribal knowledge, of code inspection. That's like impossible to automate or quantify, exactly. So I think that first part of the process is sort of that we have to assume, I guess, that the behavior list is comprehensive in what we consider conformant. And that's the sort of agreement we make when we define that as the specification for conformance. That's all I'm trying to say. So that 687, what I'm trying to understand is that 687, you're measuring that how exactly? Because it's going to be, it seems like it's going to be some part of that list of behaviors, but I don't know if it's going to be comprehensive. Are you following my question, or am I blathering?
No, it's fine. It is the list we have is definitely comprehensive. From looking at the automated, the pods, the swagger.json, we're descending through the entire tree, and it's okay. Go ahead.
But that's comprehensive around the number of fields or whatever that we have. Yep. But if you think about behaviors aren't one-to-one with fields, like that's the fields. API spec is one source of material, one source of raw, it's one set of raw material for behaviors, and there's other pieces of raw materials. Talking to the SIGs, reading the documentation, inspecting the code. There may be things I'm just being, combinations of fields, like how does this particular timer and that particular timer interact? So that might be something that requires multiple descriptions in the behaviors that need to be potentially tested. So my point is that I guess I don't think we're going to ever get to where we fully automate that denominator, that listing of behaviors. It's still a manual process, and so I don't know that. I mean, I get your 687 here as a place to start, but I'm not sure that will become the actual denominator eventually in the list of, or rather, from a tooling perspective, the list of behaviors is definitionally what is conformant, and therefore it's just a static number of behaviors. It's checked into the repo.
I'm going to pull this out because because PodsBack is one thing, and it sounds like this is the BDD setup, and having it be a separate measurement, and it may be that BDD has en route and has a focus on PodsBack at some point, but it's not. It's loosely defined at this point. And in trying to get us to a point where we have a PR bot that is clearly defined and has numerators and denominators that we can agree. I'm trying to just limit it in scope, and I want to try to figure out, do we want to not have PodSpec in there right now?
Well, what I'm thinking is that the PR bot right now should use our existing measure, which is the endpoints. I don't know that we have another measure, unless you can tell me you already can measure this.
We have a measure for this. I'm just having trouble visualizing it right now. I can. It's probably better to do a pairing or a walkthrough on it rather than try to do it on a call like this. But I guess I was trying to in general is from pod to pod spec of something around 687 fields where we have this where we're using it. Is this a reasonable start? If so, I'll write that up more precisely.
I guess I don't fully understand what it is yet, so maybe we.
Okay. I'll come back to that.
Okay.
On denominator for watch, what we can do is there is actually for each, and this is for operations, there are operations that support watch. That is, and those operations will hit a particular set of where did they go? Of objects and kinds.
Right.
And that list is around 134, if I remember off the top of my head. And those are denominator are 134 operations that support watch. And I don't have the report handy, but it's somewhere around 20, 25, depending on the job. Go ahead.
We're testing today, you're saying?
Yeah, if you look at the current release blocking jobs, we're sitting at about a fifth coverage on watch, and that's just whether we hit it or not whether we hit it in a meaningful way.
Yeah,
that's the same thing for all of this for operations, PodsBack, and watch. It doesn't cover meaning. That's what behaviors will do at some point.
Yeah,
But this does give us a decent understanding of the coverage area. And it may be that we've got a test that needs a little bit of looking at. I think, I don't know if they're on yet, Zach. Nope.
so the idea here is that if you, if somebody submits a PR that adds a bunch of things that support watch and they don't add any kind of tests around that they're going to see a decrease in coverage here, and it's going to be flagged. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, well, that's the difference. We're trying to make this not just flagging, but a PR denying bot.
I know, blocking eventually, yeah.
Blocking. I want to make sure we're not being being kind.
Yeah. Well, I think we have to. I haven't followed up comments on the PR, but I mean, we can't introduce a blocking job right away, right? It has to be non-blocking for a little while and make sure that it's not screwy.
No.
I think that this isn't what I had in mind around watch. There's certain, I think this is important nonetheless. What I want to do around watch isn't so much test basic watch functionality of every resource, although that's probably helpful. It's around defining the specific semantics of watch. Like if you read the documentation of watch, it specifies, for example, that sequencing within a kind is deterministic, but not across kinds. So, like you don't have a single global version. Now, in practice, because we back with etcd, we have a single global version, at least in OSS. But there are vendors who want to swap out etcd. I think Amazon may have done that. I think Microsoft maybe wanted to do that. There's certainly been discussion of it here. And we want to make sure that, and K3S, for example, has swapped it out. We want to make sure that we specify the minimum semantics needed to support Kubernetes. Watch, we don't want watch to inherit accidental strong constraints from etcd that would be impossible or difficult to implement in other backends. So if somebody wants to shard across backends, for example, the single global sequence number or deterministic ordering is kind of a death knell, or makes things a lot harder. So those are the kind of things I want to define as part of watch that haven't really been, they may be mentioned in passing somewhere, there may be a statement, but because we don't have any, like in my ideal world, we'd actually actively check a provider's watch functionality with potentially with clients that rely on looser constraints than etcds, but what we've defined as conformant in watch, so that we would actually, those resources would break, those clients would break, because we don't want these things creeping in accidentally. That's what I'm talking about when I say watch is a high priority. That said, like that's why I'm saying, like, also the failure behaviors, what happens on disconnect and redelivery, and there's lots of sort of pieces like that that just need to be clearly stated if they're not. That's why I was saying I can take a cut at it, but the real experts are the ones that are going to have to say, yes, that's how it works, that's how it should work. And so we're going to need help from that SIG in order to really get that nailed down.
Is it best to do this in email discussions, or?
It's best to do this with writing a document that describes how we think it works and is supposed to work, and then having the right people, aka SIG API machinery and potentially others, review it and revise it until we get agreement on it.
I've been thinking of doing that in the CAP. Should I do that in just a Google Doc that I share and show up to the different meetings?
Yeah, I wouldn't put that in this CAP. Like, that would be something we put into a Google Doc or into, I think there's actually like a section in the documentation somewhere that talks about watch, or maybe in the developer documentation. It could potentially go there. If I could find it, I think there's like a TBD there or something like that actually in the document. But a Google Doc is sometimes easier to comment on and change than a PR, but either way. PR has better posterity, like it's preserved better in a way. So I don't want to derail what you're doing. Like, this is actually useful still, what you're talking about. Just because from my understanding, talking to the API machinery folks, that, you know, it is important to test the different resources, because somebody could do something wrong and have a resource not work properly. But that's not necessarily what my goal was in that watch as a priority. But nonetheless, I think this is useful. So I would treat them as separate efforts. Okay.
In line with what I think it was Timothy went through last week with us around our API reach coverage metrics. It was 164. If you go back to our Google Doc for this meeting, and you go down to last week? Yeah, October 8th. And then we have the coverage metrics for watch. And just underneath that, Timothy was talking about the steps to instantiate an object and iterate through them. And
right.
We've taken a look at that, but we want to make sure that we get more feedback on that. So we created the E2E dynamic client. It's a ticket, an issue 84162. I'll drop that into our share. Yeah. And I just want to make sure that we're doing the right approach. We haven't found the simple way to list all resource types yet. We've got the dynamic going, and then when we're looking at those types, if we're going to create them, would it be easier for me to share my screen for this one, or?
If you want, sure.
All right. Here's the share. E2E test for dynamic client. Let me know if that worked.
Yeah, I can see it.
Good. We're having trouble with number 3, but I also wanted to make sure that this seems like a reasonable approach to the test. And we've been trying it, just doing it on our own, but I think it would be good to get some feedback. I think if I saw that we just, that Lava Lamp was assigned just yesterday.
Okay.
Did you take a look at Valero or formerly known as Arc or Sonobuoy's sort of scanning? Because they use the dynamic client.
We'll take another look at that. I think we did, and maybe it wasn't clear on how that was initialized. We'll take another look. So I'll just put here in our comments. Take another look at Sonobuoy.
Well, the Valero is like a backup tool, right? So that one might be better to look at.
Yep.
Valero, VA.
VE, like the gas station.
Valero?
I don't know if it's ERO. I'd have to take a look again.
Okay. All right, we'll comment there and we can come back to that. But that's I think, and then it was the filter for those, right? So if you look back at the filter, if we're going to go through and actually create a watch and create them, most of the kinds have a lot of requirements. And so if we just wanted the initial limit is just say, look for stuff where they only require the name, and then we'll modify the name.
The thing that concerns me about this approach is, right, it's not only that they have requirements that we don't know what to fill in for, but they might have some effect, right? And we don't necessarily want to have that effect. Some of these things end up creating some thing in the cloud provider, if there's a cloud provider with load balance. I mean, that would be if you set load balancer type, for example. That's not necessarily a big deal, but like, if we want to know if we're going to have an effect, I guess. If it's purely automated, I'm not sure, we're not going to know.
Dynamic client's not the right way to go about it, then.
Well, I mean, Daniel Lava Lamp, and he had the same thoughts Tim did of like, hey, let's go through and we can automate this. I don't know a solution for the problems, like we need to fill in values for certain required fields. We could just, as long as it creates them, even if they're invalid, like, there's no such image, for example, on a container image thing. So if you put random strings in there, I would just want to make sure it's not harmful. That's all. I mean, and maybe we just have to look at them, one by one at that point.
We'll have the logs of when we get this running, but I just wanted to check that. I think that may be it for this one. Is that it for?
So yeah, I think that's it. If you go back a little further down the agenda, I think that's all we had. What do we should figure out the action items from all this though. To Marty from email, which is good. We can use that as a template with her. So we need to, I have an action item to update the summit schedule to include this conformance session, and I can take Tim's email and these notes here to put together a description, Hippie, and then I'll send it to you if you want to check it, review it before I let the summit staff know. Or you can do it either way. I don't care.
No, I'm trying to. I'll add this later. I'm having trouble typing at the moment. Would you capture that? Yeah. Thanks. We've got some new blood here at II. This is Amber. She's starting as an intern this week.
All right. Welcome.
She'll be coming with us to San Diego as well.
Awesome. What are the AIs we have here? Beyond the standard review PRs. We need to work more on this agenda, I think, for the conformance working group meeting. So for our next, could you, I'll have an AI. I haven't seen your screen, so I can't type either right now.
I'm trying to type the plus here. It's just plus and then fill a mark. There we go. And Google.
There we go, yeah.
Figuring it out.
That's cool, yeah. Then basically, to sort that out. Actually, yeah, also one for the working group meeting. I need to check into how it's advertised on Sketch and make sure that it says it's a working group meeting. This isn't for looky-loos that they won't show up.
So I need that to update. Sorry for the.
All right. Any other action items beyond reviewing all the open PRs?
I feel like
Okay.
there's some stuff around the watch, but we'll just work on that as an entire set.
Okay. Well, like I said, yeah. Let's. What you got, I think, is good. We'll treat that other thing as a separate aspect of this.
Thanks for clarification, and thanks for everybody's time today.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Any
Thank you.
last items before we go? Okay. All right. Have a great week.